Hey, Todd.
What's up, buddy? I'm excited
How's
to
it
talk
going?
about what I know is one of your favorite topics, the national parks. And
How would you know? How would you know that I like national
because you
parks
talk
from
about
looking
the
at me?
national parks all the time, and then of course the backdrop.
The backdrop. It is the
But how
backdrop.
did you
Yeah.
get so into national parks? Like I'm not into national parks, but you've taken it to another level. How did this become such a passion of yours?
Yeah, I mean that's actually kind of what I want to talk about today is the sentiment is the reason that I love parks so much, or one of the reasons, and that is that I think that they're the most tangible expression of patriotism and democracy that we have in this country and maybe in the world. I think that they represent everything that this country does and should stand for, and therefore that's what I fought for when I was in the military, when I went to combat. People fight for a lot of different things, right? They fight for, freedom in the American way, and I don't know, our grandparents fought to fend off tyranny, et cetera, et cetera. And I couldn't have told you when I was in uniform that that's what I was fighting for, but I knew that I was fighting or serving for some sort of love of country and patriotism and the people who live here and the ideals that this nation espouses. And so then I find so many of them wrapped now today into national parks and public lands generally. I kind of focus on the big national parks, the name brand ones, but it's really all public lands, all federal public lands. And I think that is very much in retrospect what I fought for.
Huh. That I don't. It's interesting because I love national parks, but I wouldn't necessarily see it as patriotic. But I guess what's the notion for you? Is it like that these are protected spaces? This is very much the United States of America. Like it's the physical land on which we live and
Yeah, I think there's
community.
a yeah, I think there's a number of things. I think it starts with these are our best places, right? The Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Yosemite, like this is the best that the portion of the continent that our nation occupies has to offer, from a physical space, from a tourist attraction. So whether it's an American visiting them or someone coming from overseas to see what we have, like the Grand Canyon's awesome. And then we took this step as a democracy to preserve it, to not make it for today, but to make it for today and tomorrow and the day after and the years after and the decades to come, and for us and our children, our grandchildren, et cetera, right? And so the idea that we're like, hey, we have this amazing thing, what do we do? Do we monetize it? Do we put it in capitalist hands, or do we democratize it and do we put it in everybody's hands? And so, like, look at the difference between what Niagara Falls looks like and what the Grand Canyon looks like, right? And it's a very, very different scenario. The Niagara Falls is something that, if it were in a different part of the country, or if the country had been settled from west to east, it would be a national park and it would be a pristine, vista-filled landscape. It wouldn't be hotels and casinos. And also, it's on the border, so that's another whole thing. But it's a good example of the sort of monetization, the capitalization of a natural resource or a beautiful place. So we've democratized them in many, many ways. The third thing would be that democratization means that every American man, woman, and child, so from birth, every American citizen owns these places. They are not owned by the government. They are not owned, just alone. They are not. It's not like a military base where they're owned by the government and then like restricted in certain ways.
Yeah.
They're not owned by the states or the municipalities or even individual people or corporations. They're owned. The public lands are owned by all Americans, and then overseen by Congress, National Park Service, and Department of the Interior, and other government entities we can talk about later. And so I think that part of it, to me, is what makes it most democratic. This shared ownership of a physical place.
Shared ownership of a physical place, the notion that we would do something for posterity and that they're free too, the parks, right?
No, they're not. They're not free. Some of them are.
They're
Some
not free.
places, some
Okay.
places are free. A lot of them have admission, and admission goes a long way to maintaining them.
Yeah.
Um, and there's also really affordable passes that people could get. So if you're
Yeah, yeah.
visiting a number of national parks, you get your annual pass, and you do that. But then my story goes back to, I, like you, like, kind of love national parks. Have always had, like, oh, they're cool. I want to visit them. I want to see them.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
In a selfish sense, and it's sort of a well known part of my narrative that I turned 40 years old and I realized I'd been to four proper congressionally delegated national parks, and I went did the math in my head real quick and was like, well, there's 63, so I'm not going to live to 630. So one every 10 years is not going to work. So I got to
Yeah.
accelerate my pace. And so what I did was I planned these trips to take my two daughters to national parks, and they were anywhere from age like 6 to 12 when I did this between the two of them, and then took them for 3 straight summers. We spent 30 days road tripping between national parks in the West. So I did 30-day road trips, and they kind of like we picked up where we left off on the previous one. We made this big circle from Denver kind of to the Pacific Northwest down through California, back through the Southwest, and back towards Colorado. So it followed this historic tour called the National Park to Park Highway Tour, which happened in 1920. And it was a bunch of automobile enthusiasts that were actually sort of barnstorming to bring awareness to building roads and paving roads in the West. Because at the time, we had these new things called automobiles and these relatively new things called national parks, or the National Park Service was just formed. And so they said, hey, how do we get the government to pave roads? Like, I know, we should build roads from Rocky Mountain to Yellowstone, and from Yellowstone to Glacier, and from Glacier to Mount Rainier. And so they actually did this tour, taking their Model Ts and these rutted out wagon trails. And I followed that route roughly to take my daughters to these parks. They did 12 parks in 76 days, I believe. We did 24 parks over a combined 90 days.
90 days. Oh my gosh.
The,
That's
over
incredible.
3 summers, let's make sure, I'm 3 30-day trips. But yeah,
Oh, 330 trip. Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But still, wow.
It's great. It was a trip of
Um,
a lifetime. I hope it's what my daughters write about for their college essays. I don't know if they will, if they learned
yeah,
enough from it, but like to
right.
me, it's like the trip of a lifetime. And I believe that the parks are there. You should visit parks, all the major ones, all the really the highlight ones. You should visit them twice in your life. You should visit them once
Yeah,
as a
yeah,
kid, and you should visit them once when you take your kids. Right. And I think those are really two amazing opportunities to see places like Yellowstone and Glacier.
yeah. Just spectacular views. Yeah, I absolutely need to do. Have you been to the Indiana Dunes? I believe that is the most recently designated national park. Am I wrong
I
on
think
that?
second most. So New River Gorge in West Virginia is the 63rd. Indiana Dunes is either 61st or 62nd. It came in around the same time that the Gateway Arch National Park in St. Louis came around, which is the nation's smallest national park, and probably shouldn't be in the Vista Park category with the other big congressionally delegated ones. It probably should be a national monument like it used to be, but we're going to leave the St. Louis discussion for another time. I've been to Indiana Dunes. Growing up in Illinois, I went there as a kid when it was just like it was a state park and then a national seashore, which means part of it was federal public land, and part of it was and still is state land. There's still a state park there that sort of is in the middle of two pieces of national park, right? But you
Yeah.
you know it a lot better than I did. But I finally got there, having gone there as a kid before it was designated national park. I finally got to the proper national park part of it just a year ago. I took my daughter there last fall and really enjoyed it.
Stunning. The Indiana Dunes are. I just get a huge plug to. If you live in Chicago, you got to get to the Indiana Dunes. Um, let me ask you a question because it's interesting when you frame it as like a generational project for posterity. Like I'm thinking about like you know Teddy Roosevelt and like the commitment to creating national parks as a with the foresight that this will serve and benefit generations of Americans and children
Hmm.
not yet born. And then I think about the national highway system, and very much in sort of same spirit of like this is a generational investment that we're going to make, and it is not about what it'll do yield for us, but it is about like what it'll yield for future generations. And there's probably other things that we could point to. I'm curious. Well, I mean, certainly like World War II and like what that generational service and sacrifice was. I'm just like wondering, like, what's the maybe we could say like getting a man on the moon was a generational project that unlocked something. Like, what do you think is the generational project at hand that we either are pursuing and like let's expand the time frame to like the last 20 years or should be pursuing? I mean, and also there's like this layer. I don't want to like necessarily politicize this, but like the layer around like data centers and like there's a lot of kind of arguments like playing out in real time about like extraction of natural lands for commercial purposes. So what is the generational project? Like, when was the last time we did something to sort of serve not ourselves but posterity, future generations?
I think your question is your question's on the right track, because when you start to list the candidates for the answer to your question, you're actually going to start to see tons of overlap, even with national parks. So I'll start with the highway system, right, which was massively expanded in the 50s, right? I think people who are our age realize that like these interstates, like there just weren't really any interstates like that. The infrastructure that we grew up with, like yeah, it's easy to jump on I-80 or take 55 from Chicago to New Orleans or whatever. Like that didn't exist. This is they call it the Eisenhower, national highway system or something similar to that, and that's really important. Also, a lot of that infrastructure is now kind of crumbling literally and physically. And so I think that um, uh, we need to be reinvesting in some of these things that were these generational projects. But we were really good at doing that in the wake of really all of the New Deal, right? After so you look at dams and the Bureau of Reclamation, everything that Tennessee Valley Authority, creation of electricity, even back then renewable electricity from hydro sources, et cetera, into World War II and beyond, and you look at Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all of those things. So I think healthcare generally is one. So Medicaid and Medicare was. Um, and I think that Obamacare, or any aspect of what ended up being Obamacare, the fight for healthcare for all, which started well before Obama, right? With the Clintons, even before that, like that fight is a generational thing that has a there is a chance for everyone to have some sort of healthcare now, so that's great. And then I think that you mentioned data centers and you mentioned AI. I think that has to be like the next one. Like, how do we like the AI fight is the fight, the AI debate is around a lot of different things, right? It's around land use and data centers and water use. It's around how it affects our kids. It's around how it can be used, how it can be used for everyday tasks, how it can be used for business, how it can be used for war. And there's all these questions, but ultimately there's like this geopolitical question about AI that I think that we as a nation need to figure out how to answer collectively or collectively with our allies, which is just I can't point to anything. There's no answer to that yet. It's what people smarter than us are really, really struggling with. Um, and so I think that there's a future generational challenge that deserves a generational solution. But all of this ties back in together, because those highway systems and before that the railroads are what got people to the national parks, right? And we also talk about national parks as sort of preventative healthcare, right? So theoretically, like if you spend more time outdoors, you might need less Medicare, right? Or whatever. And so it's also like a place for retirees. Why do so many retirees spend their times jumping in RVs and going to national parks? Well, because they have Social Security, right? And they're retired and they're paying their bills of Social Security, and they're able to finally go out and see Old Faithful. And then I think that when you talk about the data centers, when you talk about the land, when you talk about the land use and the water rights, particularly, that is very, very much in and the energy generation too, right? That's very much in play with national parks, because what we're seeing now is a climate politically and administratively that is raping the national parks and public lands, or threatening to. I can go in detail as to how, but like that is what is at hand right now. That's scary, because we all love to say, wow, this place, Glacier National Park, is so beautiful. Well, the glaciers are melting. That's a climate change thing, right? And we like to say, like, oh man, I love to share, this place, Yellowstone, with all of the foreign visitors who want to see. And we go to national parks to see tons of foreign visitors. Well, they increased the foreign visitor fees by like 10x or something. So it's really hard for foreign people to go see it now, right? And then you want to say like, oh, well, Rocky Mountain, that's a place where I can take my kids. Like maybe, but some of the fires that have happened in Rocky Mountain means, the entire western side of the park from a fire 5 or 6 years ago is like eviscerated. Oh, and by the way, everybody who works at these places, their funding has been cut, their staffing has been reduced, and now there's threats of extraction, oil and gas extraction, extraction of like more access to forested lands for forestry. Again, building data centers. There's a place somewhere in the Southwest, I can't remember where they were supposed to put in a solar farm, and instead they're putting in a data center on public land. Is that is that our legacy? Is that the posterity we're looking for? Maybe, and maybe it's part of that great future solution, but like we're not doing it with any of the democratic processes that are typically involved with creating and protecting these places.
Is I thought, uh, I don't know, like I'm not deep in the politics of this, but like I I feel like conservation is one of those issues, not environmental, not climate change activism, but like
Hmm. Hmm.
conservation is one
Teddy
of those
Roosevelt
issues that
conservation, right?
Teddy
Like
Roosevelt
keep
conservation,
the
protect
animals
our
there so I
public
can hunt
lands.
them.
Yeah, like I don't get the sense that there's sort of like a partisan schism around like extraction of public water resources for um like AI energy farms. But is am I wrong on that? Like I actually feel like this is an issue that's kind of cut like has cross currents that cut across normal partisan divides. And that
So,
there's a consensus, particularly when you get local, that people are like, we don't want like data centers coming in. Like we are skeptical of that. We don't trust that sort of like the politics have been run properly. We don't, like there's just general skepticism, and I don't get the sense that that's necessarily a partisan divide. But is that wrong?
so I think that there's like three things to think about here. Number one is that like we do have like obviously you drive through a lot of the parts of the country and you see front lawn signs that say no data center, right? And it's a NIMBY thing, right? Like no data centers in my backyard, right? But it also is it is a limitation to the expansion of AI because AI needs compute, right? Then and to be faster and stronger and better, they just need more compute, which means they need more data centers, which means they need more electricity, which means they need more water. And what people are saying is, if you put it near me, it's going to take away my electricity and my water, or it's going to make my bills go up, and we're subsidizing this. Now the question is always, what are we subsidizing it for, right? And at the moment, we're subsidizing it for private gains, right? For rich people to make more money. Okay. At the same time, as a nation, if you were to elevate it to a more sort of national geopolitical trend, now you're thinking about, well, what's China doing? How are they doing it? How are they thinking about the water, the electricity, and then and the safety protocols that need to go into sort of the creation of generative AI? And what you see is that they don't care. They treat human rights differently than we do, and they don't have a democracy. And so they're just going to do whatever they do, and then we have to compete with them. Well, how do we do that, right? So is there a world in which we're merging together sort of, federal priorities and public lands and data centers and water use and all that kind of stuff, and doing it somewhat responsibly, but in a way that we can keep up with China? Luckily, for the moment, we have a lead, but I don't know that we always will. But it becomes a really, really difficult question, because the easy thing is to say, hey, how do we preserve these beautiful places? Well, you just preserve them, and you say no data center here, and you say no dam here, and you say no oil drilling here, and no, even solar farms, even renewables, like no renewables. We're not going to put, you know, um, nuclear power next to Old Faithful. It's not going to happen, right? So I think that you get into this these cascading effects, and then these opposing interests that come to the same conclusion. And the best example is actually last year when Senator Mike Lee from Utah led a bill in Congress. It was actually part of the budget reconciliation that would have put 300 million acres of federal land, mostly controlled by the Bureau of Land Management. So none of this was proper national parks. It was BLM land, and it has different rules. Different public lands have different rules, so we won't get into. But let's just say that it's still land owned by every man, woman, and child in America. It's a huge part of Utah. If you ever look at the BLM holdings in Utah, it's like it's huge. But he was looking at, I wouldn't say it's 6, 7, or 8 Western states, and 300 million acres, and it was going to be for sale to whomever. And the way most people thought about that was, oh man, they're going to take this beautiful land and some rich dude is going to put his mansion on it. Maybe that's true.
Mm-hmm.
What's actually more likely is some corporation is going to acquire the ability to control that land so that they control the water that runs through that land. so they can have the water rights, because now water rights for data centers is really important. People weren't thinking about that. Now,
Mm-hmm.
ironically, yes, you have your typical objections to that, whether it's the rich people owning these things, or whether it's the use of water, or the use of land, or environmental protections of flora and fauna, which are all interrupted by a lot of the things that are happening now. What ends up happening on the other end, though, is you have the people who typically, those are the people I just described, typically lean left and progressive. And then you have all the sort of the hunters and the outdoorsmen who typically lean right and are more conservative, but they came out staunchly against this, which is why it didn't happen. It actually, the hunters and the fishermen, we call them the hook and bullet people, right? Like that crew of thousands and thousands of people in Utah and elsewhere were like, excuse me, this is where I hunt. This is where I fish. This is where I take my kids. It's where I camp. It's where I run my four wheeler. It's where I do this, because all that stuff is allowed on BLM land. It's relatively lawless and it's owned by all of us. And not lawless, but sorry, it's relatively accessible to a lot of activities that would probably be prohibited inside national parks, but you can do it on BLM land, like backcountry camping and all that kind of stuff. And so, they came out and said, no, thank you. Please don't sell this to Mark Zuckerberg or whomever, right? I'd like to continue hunting elk in this area. And their voice is really strong. And they came alongside the conservationists, who they normally probably disagree with about, right? Like the conservationists are also like, we want to put the wolves back out here. And these guys who might be friends with a bunch of ranchers are like, no wolves, please, right? And so like
Yeah, right.
sometimes they butt heads, but like other times like this, they really put Mike Lee in his place. And I'd like to see that happening more and more with some of these issues, because it does again prove the democracy of it. It proves that we're actually creating places and lands that serve different people for different reasons at different times, and that's actually a really democratic way to approach it.
Interesting. What's your favorite national park?
It's a trick
Or which one?
question,
Like,
Todd.
I know. I mean, they're all, but like, what's one that what's the most underrated, or at least discussed, that we should talk and know more about?
Um, okay, so I'm gonna give a couple answers. Great Basin National Park is the most underrated, because it has alpine meadows. It has a cave that you can. I think it's a limestone cave, but it's a very cool cave. But it also has like a mountain that you can climb that's over 10,000 feet. Um, and it also has one of my favorite campgrounds I've ever stayed inside a national park. Great Basin is in the middle of nowhere, um, just across the Utah border in Nevada. And it's called Great Basin because it actually is meant to represent the entire area there. That's like that's the Great Basin of the West, where when it rains, the water goes nowhere. Right? Do you know about this? Like, it doesn't flow to a river. You
Yeah,
talk about the
yeah,
continental divides
yeah.
and stuff, but in the Great
Right.
Basin, the water just like doesn't go anywhere. It gets absorbed into the earth. So Great Basin is an amazing park for many different reasons. Oh, also the best night sky program I've ever been to in a national park. So they do a thing called Dark Skies, where and they have this amazing cement area where they've made benches. They have red lights so people can kind of still see, but then you go out and the rangers have their telescopes and they talk to the kids about what go look at the rings of Jupiter, or sorry, rings of Saturn. And that to me is such an amazing thing to do. So Great Basin. I love Olympic. I've been there a bunch of times. I've done some backpacking Olympic with veterans and had some really interesting experiences in Olympic. The quietest place on earth is an Olympic, called the One Square Inch of Silence. So that's really an amazing place to
Really?
visit. Yeah.
The
You go
quietest place on earth.
well, there's a lot of quietest places on earth, right? But
Okay.
there's like a standard that you can meet, but these audiologists, a guy named Gordon Hempton, who lives in Seattle, and it's probably why he picked a place in Olympic. But um there's a little tiny red rock. It's about 1 inch by 1 inch, just spray painted red. And it's on a log in a place that you got to go find. And when you sit there, it's been recorded. You can go like up to 8 hours without hearing any sound made by human beings. Right. So you just hear birds and wind and water, basically. But you got to go around to the far side of the Olympic Peninsula on US 101. Then you got to go 17 miles inland into the Hoh Rainforest. And then you got to walk 3 miles down a trail, and you get to a specific point in a trail, and you walk through this like archway of a tree, and you walk through the tree, and then you walk about, I don't know, 150 yards down a trail over the river and through the woods. And then you get to this point where you find the One Square Inch of Silence, and you sit there and meditate I've been there twice. It's one of my favorite places in the world. So Olympic gets up there. Hawaii Volcanoes is my home park, right? It's not technically Haleakala is closer to my house, but Hawaii Volcanoes is very accessible and very unique. And living in Hawaii, it's I've been there a dozen times or more. Um, I mean, I can keep going. They're all so amazing. I haven't been to all of them yet. I've been about half of the 63 congressionally delegated designated parks, and my goal obviously would be get to all of them relatively
You
soon.
Okay, my last question. You already sort of said St. Louis is perhaps overrated or misclassified, which based on what you've just shared sounds right. What is there a natural space in this country that you think ought to be a national park that is not yet?
Hmm. If there was, it's probably something that's already designated as public lands. So a lot of places become national monuments first, and then uh, they transition into national parks. There's actually a place in southern Arizona, and the name escapes me at the moment, but it has a lot of unique flora and fauna, and also a lot of indigenous culture preserved there. And I think that places like that have been overlooked. I know this one is moving forward on the list of places that could become the next national park. Um, so I think finding places there's one in New Mexico called Chaco Culture, which is all, I don't know if it's ever been considered for a national park, but it's a national monument. It's a lot like Mesa Verde. So a lot of people, oh, we have Mesa Verde, we don't need other places. I'm like, we do, because every different sort of indigenous inhabitation. Also, Mesa Verde is very unique. Like they don't even know really who lived there, why, and when, and they learn more about it. But it's not. There's no through lines to like people who are currently living in this country representing indigenous culture. Um, so I think something that better represented indigenous culture would be wonderful. I also think just finding more parks in the East would be pretty great, because you have a few. You have Great Smoky Mountains, which is like the most visited of all national parks year after year, but it's because of its location. They're in Eastern Tennessee, Western North Carolina, that people who live in the Atlantic coast can and the Midwest can get there relatively easily. So it becomes very, very visited, and congested, right? And so like you kind of need more parks. This is probably what they're going after with New River Gorge in West Virginia. And there's Congaree is in South Carolina. There's 3 parks in Florida. I know there's an attempt to create another park in Florida that would kind of be like a distributed park. I don't know a lot of details about it. It's an early proposal. Um, let's talk about one more thing though. Let's talk about Big Bend National Park, which is on the Rio Grande River, on the Big Bend in the Rio Grande, which is sort of, if you ever think about Texas, it has those 2 little humps, right? The one that goes all the way down to Corpus Christi, but the other one, that the other hump is the Big Bend, and that's where the park is. And they are currently bulldozing Big Bend, and they're going to put up the infamous Trump border wall at this national park, where no one ever illegally crosses the border ever. And I've been there. I've canoed down the Rio Grande there. When we canoed down the Rio Grande, we just went out and slept in Mexico because you can, and it's easy. And now they're going to ruin that. They're actually going to cut off access for Americans to the Rio Grande at Big Bend and other places, which makes no sense. And the most amazing parts of this park are going to be lost because they think they need to put up a physical border wall. More importantly, they're bulldozing and building and excavating, and with no care for the environmental surveys that need to be done by law, by the Endangered Species Act, and many other acts of Congress from the 60s, 70s that help us to preserve things like the bald eagle and the gray wolf, right? These highlight species that make America so amazing. They're just bulldozing through without thinking about what plants they're destroying, what animals they're ruining the habitat for, what ecosystem they're disrupting. And that's actually the hard part, right? Like you can develop in conjunction with preserving these beautiful places, but what you can't do is do it without that democratic processes that are required by asking the people and having hearings and understanding it and doing the science. Um, and I don't know why the administration. Oh, I think we probably know why, but the administration just thinks that they can literally bulldoze their way through this, and kind of destroy first and ask questions later, or face consequences. I don't know. Um, and then on the flip side of the country and the flip side of the coin of the process, we also just had Congress pass some legislation that removed protections for areas surrounding the border waters canoe area, which is adjacent to Voyageurs National Park in northern Minnesota on the Canadian border. And the protections had been put in place to protect against development, specifically of mines. And it's very clear what they're doing is they pass this legislation to remove those protections so that a copper mine owned by a Chilean company can be built there. And all the science points to that copper mine is going to infect the waters. And you know how waterways work. You put some pollution in here, it's going to flow to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, and we're going to pollute the border, the boundary waters. I think I said border earlier. It's boundary waters canoe area, and so this idea that Congress would actually take that action um, is a more in line with the way that it should work, and b still something that people should be fighting against. And so one of my goals and one of the things that I'm working on now is how do I find as many veterans as I can who are fighting for parks, right? And I'm going to list you now, Todd. You can start with Indiana Dunes, and you can keep fighting for parks.
Got it.
But where are the veterans who are preserving parks as a way to preserve what we fought for in the military? And there's so many ways to do it: parks, public lands, Forest Service, BLM, Interior National Park Service. All these places are really really important to kind of what we've created here, to what America is. And here we are, America's 250th, and we sit down and we look and what have we created? What have we done? And the national parks are the legacy of first Lincoln, who was the person who first set aside Yosemite Valley as a place that should be preserved, and then very much Teddy Roosevelt, and then also Franklin Roosevelt has done a ton. George W. Bush actually. I don't know the exact number, but he made maybe the most parks of any recent president. I want to say like 6, 7, 8 national parks under his 8-year term. He made all these national parks, and so like he and people who love his administration should care about this. So it crosses partisan lines. It is fundamentally American, and I'd like to see veterans and citizens alike sort of standing up and fighting for national parks and public lands. You with me?
I'm with you. I've got conviction. Thank you, brother, for sharing that. I'll
Thanks for
take out
letting
the
this one
Indiana
be
Jones.
a thanks for this one letting be a soliloquy on my end, but I think
No,
there's always more to talk about.
I, 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 I love hearing people that have a deep passion and an informed perspective. I know very little, so thank you. That was really illuminating. And I would like, I mean, I'm kind of like, let's bring in someone that just has a different point of view, and I'd love to hear it. I'd be curious what I mean, you could speculate, but yes, um, this is a national asset, and I think the thing that I want to talk in the future about is like, how do we get the country back to a place where we could, in fact, take on a generational project with posterity's, in mind? It's like it seems that seems so far fetched in this moment, and that is like a kind of a meta depression that hits me to think of like our inability to have the capacity to think about a big generational project, right? So
Yeah.
maybe we can
We're
talk
not
about
good
that
at
in the
that
future.
anymore. We're not good at that. And maybe thinking about parks is the first way to get us back there, because we can remember
Yeah.
what our forefathers, not the 1776 forefathers, but our 1916 forefathers brought forth for us. I think that's
Yeah.
actually really important. I also think that if you tried to find somebody who wanted to argue with me directly about the value of national parks, you actually wouldn't find a lot of individuals. The people who are pushing against this are more corporate interests, right? And so they're
It's
not going to
corporate
come on.
interest.
Yeah, they're not going to come on here and there's not a lot of voters who are like, yeah, I really truly support corporate interests. I think people should be able to put copper mines wherever they want. I mean, it's one of those things that they're actually going to get selfish about it and be like, well, I want to take my kids to that beautiful place someday, so can we not ruin it? And I think that most Americans, regardless of political or ideological affiliation, actually agree with that. And maybe, big idea, maybe we should listen to them. Maybe we should listen to the owners of these public lands, which are the American people.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Okay, man.
All right, brother.
All right. Until next time.
Appreciate you as always. Until next
All
time.
right. Thanks so much.